Imagine it's 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. The rest of the world is somewhere a bar, a dinner party, some loud room with music nobody asked for, and conversations that started 3 drinks ago and still haven't said anything. And you're in the garage. Cold workshop light overhead, a beer sitting somewhere on the floor that stopped being cold an hour ago, and your hands inside the engine of a car that, technically, runs fine. It smells like oil, warm, rubber, and that particular smell that has no name, but you'd recognize it anywhere, in any country, in any language. There's nobody else here. And you don't miss anyone. Most people would see someone avoiding the world, but you see someone who found something the world never quite managed to give him. There's an enormous difference between those two things, and very few people ever stop long enough to understand which one it actually is. This reveals something fascinating about a very specific kind of human mind. Because when a man chooses the garage over the party, he isn't running away from something, he's moving towards something. And what lies behind that choice is deeper, more honest, and more revealing of human nature than anything that could come out of a crowded dinner table conversation on a Saturday night. Research in personality psychology has consistently identified a trait that appears with notable frequency in people who develop intense, almost devotional relationships with mechanical objects, high scores in what's known as conscientiousness, combined with a profound need for predictable, controllable environments. This isn't rigidity, it's precision. It's a different relationship with the world, one built on the understanding that most things are chaotic and ambiguous, but some things, if you know them well enough, respond with perfect consistency. This is the kind of person capable of spending 40 minutes tracing the origin of a noise that only appears when the engine is cold, at exactly 1,200 revolutions per minute, with the heating running on the second setting. Not because they're obsessive, but because for them, that problem has a solution. And that, in a world that rarely offers solutions to the things that actually hurt, is a physical kind of relief. There's a concept in psychology that researcher Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying and eventually named the flow state, that mental condition in which a person is so completely absorbed in a task that time ceases to exist. Not as a metaphor, literally. The brain reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for self-monitoring and social awareness, and the result is a kind of internal silence that most people only stumble into accidentally, if they ever find it at all. Elite athletes know it, surgeons know it, jazz musicians playing in the dark know it. And amateur mechanics, though nobody has ever handed them that vocabulary or told them what to call what they're experiencing, live inside that state every single time there's a problem worth solving under a hood. The contrast with a social gathering is stark and worth sitting with for a moment. A party demands exactly the opposite of flow. It requires fragmented attention, constant impression management, the simultaneous navigation of multiple conversations at different emotional temperatures, and the exhausting performance of being interested in things you're not particularly interested in. Noise that builds nothing, laughter that doesn't mean anything specific. For a mind that functions well in depth and poorly on the surface, that environment isn't stimulating. It's genuinely draining in a way that's difficult to explain to people who don't experience it. And choosing the garage over that isn't pathological introversion or social anxiety or some failure of character. It's mental hygiene. It's knowing yourself well enough to protect the conditions under which you actually function. But here is where it gets genuinely interesting. Because this bond with the car isn't purely functional. It isn't just mechanics, just problem solving, just a hobby with grease involved. Object relations theory, developed within psychoanalysis by figures like Melanie Klein and later Donald Winnicott, proposes that human beings have a deep and largely unconscious tendency to project onto physical objects something that goes far beyond their utility. We form relationships with things, real ones. In a car, especially one you've touched with your hands repeatedly, one you've heard running wrong and brought back to running right, one that has been present during specific chapters of your life becomes what Winnicott would describe as a transitional object for adults, not in any infantile or dismissive sense, but in the sense that the object holds something of you within it, your history, your competence, the memory of who you were when you first worked on it. your time, which is the only truly non-renewable resource any of us have. Someone who just lost his father and inherited his car isn't restoring a machine. He's maintaining a relationship. He's continuing a conversation that can no longer happen any other way, with hands instead of words, through the specific language of knowing how something works. A person navigating a career collapse, feeling like nothing in his professional life responds to his effort or reflects his ability, walks into the garage and adjusts something, and that something responds exactly as it should. The relationship between cause and effect is perfect and immediate. The car doesn't lie. It doesn't change its mind for reasons it won't explain. It doesn't reward the wrong people or punish the right ones based on politics or favoritism or the mood of someone above you. In a world full of relationships with ambiguous rules, the car offers a form of clarity that functions, emotionally, like intimacy. And some people need that clarity more than they need the noise of a room full of people they half know. It isn't loneliness, it's a different kind of company, and for certain minds, it's the better kind. But here is where it gets genuinely interesting. There's a concept psychologist Erik Erikson introduced in his work on adult development called generativity, that deep, biologically rooted human need to create something that transcends the present moment, something that will outlast you, something that justifies the time you spent on Earth in a way that mere consumption never could. In adults, generativity typically expresses itself through raising children, through professional contributions, through art or construction or anything built to last. But in men who restore cars, who maintain them with obsessive care, who learn their history and understand their engineering, and preserve them against the entropy that takes everything eventually, generativity takes a shape that is different from what we usually celebrate and notable precisely because of that difference. They are building something that will last. They are preserving a way of doing things, a way of thinking about the physical world. A set of skills and knowledge that the modern world has largely decided are unnecessary and obsolete. And in that gesture, in that deliberate choice to keep something alive that the culture around them is happy to let die, there is something that borders on the political even if they would never use that word and would probably be uncomfortable if someone did. There is a quiet resistance in preferring the mechanical over the digital. In choosing to understand something with your hands rather than delegating that understanding to a screen, a warranty, a subscription service that handles it for you. In a world where more and more things are intangible, where work produces nothing you can hold, where relationships exist in clouds and servers, where most people couldn't explain how a single object in their home actually functions, the car represents one of the last remaining domains where real mastery, physical and specific and hard-won, still exists and can still be demonstrated. Not described, demonstrated. There is a difference. That isn't nostalgia. It's an assertion of identity in an environment that increasingly makes identity difficult to assert through anything concrete. But here's the curious thing. Many of these men will admit, when asked with genuine honesty and without judgment in the room, that they don't particularly enjoy solitude in the abstract. They aren't hermits. They don't dislike people in general. What they find difficult is obligatory superficiality, social ritual without depth, interaction that follows a script, conversation that exists not to understand anything but simply to confirm that everyone is performing their social role correctly. In the garage, paradoxically, many of them report feeling closer to the people they love most than they do at any family gathering or social event. Because in the garage, they are entirely themselves. No performance running in the background. No continuous low-level calculation of how they're coming across. No effort to compress who they actually are into something more digestible for the room. Authenticity, it turns out, sometimes smells like burnt oil and cold coffee. Researcher Roy Baumeister has spent a significant part of his career studying the human need for meaning what it is, where it comes from, and why some people seem to have more of it than others, despite objectively similar circumstances. One of his most consistently replicated findings is that meaning doesn't come from pleasure. It doesn't come from comfort or entertainment or social validation, though all of those things feel good in the moment. It comes from effort, from competence. From the felt sense that you are capable of something difficult and that your capability actually matters to the outcome. The people who report the deepest sense of purpose in their lives are not the ones who relax the most, or socialize the most, or accumulate the most. They are the ones doing hard things and doing them well, in domains where the feedback is real, and the standards are set by the thing itself rather than by other people's opinions. A man who diagnoses a problem in the injection system of a 30-year-old engine without a manual, without a forum thread that matches exactly, working from accumulated experience and physical intuition built over years isn't wasting a Saturday. He's doing one of the most psychologically nourishing things a human being can do. He's building meaning in the most direct, unmediated way available to him. And that is worth considerably more in terms of what the research actually shows about long-term well-being than the party he didn't go to. Identity enters here too, and more quietly than it might first appear. Psychologist Dan McAdams has spent his career studying what he calls narrative identity, the way human beings construct a coherent sense of self, not through their beliefs or their values in the abstract, but through the stories they tell about their own lives, the chapters they identify as formative, the objects and places and experiences that appear repeatedly in the account they give of who they are. And for many of these men, the car is not a peripheral detail in that account. It's a central chapter. The first car bought with money they earned themselves. The one that broke down 300 miles from home and forced them to figure it out alone. The one they worked on with someone who is no longer alive. The one that was there during the worst year, the best year, the year everything changed. Those stories don't get told at parties. They live in silence, in the body, in the specific memory of how a wrench felt in the hand on a particular night in a particular garage that no longer exists. This is where the subject stops being about cars entirely. What these men teach the rest of us, and they do teach us something, whether or not anyone is paying attention, is that purpose is not one size fits all. That depth is a legitimate value even when the culture around you rewards breadth and speed and constant availability. That real connection doesn't always happen between people in a room. That sometimes it happens between a person and a task that asks everything of them. Between a mind and a problem that doesn't care about your feelings, only your competence. Between a pair of hands and something that has earned through years of shared history, something that functions very much like loyalty. They remind us that mastery is one of the oldest forms of meaning available to human beings, that it predates psychology and philosophy and every framework we've invented to explain why we do what we do. That knowing something deeply, how it works, why it fails the way it fails, what it needs, what it can bear, is a form of respect toward the physical world that most modern life actively discourages. And that the willingness to spend real time on something, unhurried, without a guaranteed outcome, is not a symptom of something wrong. It is a symptom of something right. Transcendence doesn't always arrive through great conversations or meaningful relationships or the moments we plan for and photograph. Sometimes it arrives through an engine that starts cleanly on a cold morning after 3 days of work, through a sound that changes from wrong to right, through the particular satisfaction of knowing, without needing anyone to confirm it, that something was broken and now it isn't, and that you're the reason. That is simultaneously the smallest thing in the world and one of the most profound experiences a human being can have. It is the difference between existing and being present, between filling time and inhabiting it fully. That man in the garage on a Saturday night, hands dirty, nowhere else he'd rather be, isn't missing out on life. He's living his. The one he chose deliberately. The one that makes complete sense for a mind that needs depth and silence, and the honest feedback of a world that responds to what you actually do rather than what you say. He found something rare. A place where he is entirely himself, where his particular way of being in the world is not a liability but an asset, where the qualities that make social performance difficult are the exact qualities that make him exceptional. That isn't just a man in his car. It's a human story about what it means to find the specific conditions under which you become fully alive. And some of us spend our whole lives looking for that.